I got a request or a challenge to a debate recently, and I think it gives me a good opportunity to talk about how modern day empire works. Now, the person who challenged me to a debate is a man named Shane Brady. Shane Brady is a man who for 15 years has done what some people might call humanitarian work around the world in places like Myanmar, Libya, Iran, Pakistan, Laos. And so he was upset about my coverage of Myanmar, and he accused me of lying, although he never was able to really give me a specific example of something that I lied about. And he claimed that he could debunk everything that I said. And I mean, some of the things that I said are just basically, they're documented. There's no way to refute it, but somehow he was going to debunk it. And I understand why he's emotional, because I used to be in his shoes. And actually, Shane and I are not really all that different. There's one fundamental difference, and I'll get into that in just a moment, but let's think about it. I am a former US Marine. When I was 17 years old, I joined the US Marine Corps, and I was in the Marine Corps for almost 4 years. And I got out right before my contract was up because I did not agree with what was going on, and I wanted to get out. And I even had people in my command telling me, just wait 6 more months and you could get your benefits and then you could get out. Why are you doing this? It's because it was more important to do the right thing than to wait even another day and help contribute. That is how strongly I felt about it. So I was in what you would call the military force part of the American empire. There's the military force, and there's the administrative force. And this is how empire has always worked. You have the military go into a country and take over, and you have the administrative force come in and then run the country. They build over the rubble, and the political order that they put in place answers to whoever sent the army to destroy everything in the first place. And so this is what the US does. So they do it through the US military and contractors and everyone associated with that side. And then the administrative force is USAID. It's USAID, it's NED. The NED gets the client regime ready and puts them into power. USAID is the one trying to get people peeled away from whatever central government is operating in that country, get them peeled away and dependent on USAID. And then they can turn those people against the government who were previously dependent on the government. This is a trick that empire has used forever. And this is just the most modern iteration of this process. And so I was in the military force. Shane Brady was in the administrative force. The fundamental difference is at a very young age, I woke up and I snapped out of it. And I realized what I was doing and I got out. I've been trying to make up for it ever since. I will never forget, and this is why I kind of sympathize with Shane here, because when I was 18, when I was in the military, I was a young Marine, and I was deployed to Japan, and we were going into the base, and there was a protest by Japanese people who wanted us out. And I said, why? I said out loud to someone next to me, and they agreed with me. I said, why are they so upset? We're here to protect them. That's actually how you think when you have that point of view. And I have no doubt that Shane Brady honestly thinks that he is doing something good by working for the administrative force side of American empire. He might not even understand that it is empire, or he might think that American empire is necessary, because there are people who think that. So I want to show you this TED Talk. Now, for me, I can't stand TED Talks, and this one is Refuting, and you'll see why in just a moment, but it's by Thomas Barnett. He works for the US Department of Defense and also the Naval War College. So he works with the government. He's not just some random commentator. He has a say and influence over policy to some degree or another. And this is him talking about how America needs to reorganize its military force and its administrative force. And he spells it out explicitly. Let's listen.
If the United States fights somebody, we're going to be huge. They're going to be small. And if they try to fight us in a traditional straight-up manner, we're going to kick their ass. Which is why people don't try to do that anymore. There is no battle space the U.S. military cannot access. They said we couldn't do Afghanistan, we did it with ease. They said we couldn't do Iraq. We did it with 150 combat casualties in 6 weeks. We did it so fast, we weren't prepared for their collapse. I think we have an unparalleled capacity to wage war. I call that the Leviathan force. What we need to build is a force for the everything else. They call them the system administrators. What I think this really represents is the lack of an A to Z rule set for the world as a whole for processing politically bankrupt states. What does this mean? It means you got to stop pretending you can do these two very disparate skill sets with the same 19-year-old, switching back morning, afternoon, evening, morning, afternoon, evening. Handing out aid, shooting back. Handing out aid, shooting back. It's too much. The 19-year-olds get tired from the switching. That force on the left, you can train a 19-year-old to do that. That force on the right is more like a 40-year-old cop. You need the experience. What does this mean in terms of operations? The rule is going to be this. That sysadmin force is the force that never comes home, does most of your work. You break out that Leviathan force only every so often, but here's the promise you make to the American public, to your own people, to the world. You break out that Leviathan force, you promise, you guarantee you're going to mount one hell of a, immediately, follow-on sysadmin effort. Other differences, Leviathan, traditional partners, they all look like the Brits in their former colonies. Including us, I would remind you. The rest, wider array of partners. International organizations, non-governmental organizations, private voluntary organizations, contractors. You're not going to get away from that. Leviathan Force, it's all about joint operations between the military services. We're done with that. What we need to do is interagency operations. And you got to wage war here in such a way to facilitate that.
And some people will say, okay, well, that's just Thomas Barnett. He's just saying that. How do we know that that's actually official U.S. foreign policy? Well, I was just talking about USAID, right? And USAID is a key component in counterinsurgency strategy. The U.S. government, for many different departments, the U.S. State Department, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is where this manual is from, and the different branches of the U.S. military, they have counterinsurgency manuals, and they're all basically the same. And if you type in USAID, you'll notice that 40 results are returned. And why is that? That's because they are part of the administrative force. When you're doing counterinsurgency, think about it. When the U.S. is doing counterinsurgency, it's because their military force invaded a country, destroyed a government, put a client regime into place. Now they're trying to keep that one from being thrown out of power by an insurgency. So now you have counterinsurgency. And USAID is meant to come in there and take over all of the key essentials that people need on a daily basis. Water, food, electricity, sanitation services, sewage, garbage collection, things like that, healthcare, education, communications, media. USAID goes in and they take over all of that. That's what they do. And even when the US doesn't invade a country, maybe they're using proxy militants, or maybe there's no militants at all. Maybe it's just an opposition that the US National Endowment for Democracy is building up and getting ready to take over. USAID will go in there and start peeling communities away from their dependency on the central government and getting them dependent on this Western-backed client regime that they're building up. This is how modern day imperialism works. And this is what Shane Brady had been doing for 15 years, possibly without even knowing about it. I think if you ask a lot of US soldiers, Marines, sailors, people in the Air Force, if you ask them, they will probably tell you that they think that they're defending the country. And so, I mean, they've been misled. They've been duped into it. Some people will go their whole career and never realize what it is that they're involved in. This is Shane Brady. This is his profile on Democracy for Burma. So this is some organization that he created in Australia, and they support the opposition in Myanmar, which is now a violent opposition that's not just fighting with police and soldiers and killing them, but they're also running death squads, hunting down people that they think are working with the government in Myanmar. They're shooting up schools and bombing schools to try to enforce their civil disobedience movement. So it is a huge mess. So that's he also has his profile of all the places he went. So one of them is Concern Worldwide. Who are their institutional donors? And it says right here, the Department for International Development, UK, and USAID, and they're right down here. And also the European Union. So you have USAID from the US government, UK, and the EU. These are the three centers of Western power who are guilty of the worst crimes against humanity of the 21st century. The invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, the invasion and occupation of Iraq, 1 million people dead because of a malicious, deliberately fabricated lie about weapons of mass destruction. 1 million dead, including thousands of Western troops. The destabilization, intervention, and destruction of Libya in 2011, and the dirty war waged against Syria from 2011 onward, which includes now a US invasion and occupation of eastern Syria. And then think about the drone campaign, which is just this ongoing assassination program from North Africa to the Middle East to Central Asia. And it's admitted that 9 out of 10 of the people that get killed in these strikes have nothing to do with anything. They're collateral damage. Keep that in mind when you see USAID and UK and EU popping up for each and every one of these organizations. Literally every organization he worked for that's on his LinkedIn profile is funded by USAID. That's where I'm going with this. And so you have Save the Children, corporate partners. And so you got these corporations, including GSK and Johnson & Johnson. These are horrible, toxic corporations. They're involved in so much corruption, and they have endangered people's lives also. How you could be acting in good faith and see their name anywhere and want to associate with them is a question that I would want to ask. But they also get money from USAID. So here, Global, Save the Children, a core partner on $100 million USAID, moving integrated quality maternal, newborn, child health, and family planning, reproductive health services to scale. This is what a country should be doing themselves for their people, but here's USAID going into these countries and doing it instead. And then they're getting those people dependent on USAID and Western-backed opposition groups. This is how this works. This is how this whole thing works. This is the country risk reduction profile for Myanmar. And so it's only 2 pages, and then the first sentence is, Save the Children has collectively reached nearly 45,000 children with over $3.7 million funding from all of these groups, including Australian aid and USAID. So there's USAID again, specifically about Myanmar, where Shane Brady worked. Now, he said he worked with Relief International in Iran. And he said in his video challenging me to a debate, which he has since taken down, I'll get into that in a minute. He said he had worked for a charity in Iran, and now he's sanctioned by the US government. But I'm finding that difficult to understand, and you'll see why in just a moment. So Relief International, okay, our partners, the European Union, USAID, UK aid, Google, European Union, US Department of State, the Canadian government, the World Bank. USAID is mentioned twice for some reason. The US Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. So if Shane was working for this organization in Iran, is he trying to tell us that the US government is now sanctioning him for working for a US government-funded organization in Iran? It doesn't make sense to me. I'd want to ask him some questions to clarify that, maybe perhaps provide evidence. Another one is humanity and inclusion, and this one has multiple websites depending on which country you click on. So I looked at the UK, and that's funded by the UK government, and this is the US one, so USAID and US State Department. So again, US government, UK government, EU. And then there was this one, and I almost didn't find it because they got it buried pretty good. Trocare, I think that's how you pronounce it. And if you go through here, it's very hard to find who's actually funding them. And as a matter of fact, if you come down here, contributions from governments and similar bodies, and you see the EU, the UK, and Australia mentioned here, and you see USAID, how they wrote it, US space aid. And so if you search USAID with no spaces, you wouldn't have found it. But luckily, I found it. So literally every organization that he listed, that he worked for 15 years in all of these countries, that he's claiming this is all a matter of agency and self-determination. All of these organizations he worked for were funded by the US government, just like I said. He said, Brian, thinks that the US is behind everything. Well, everything that Shane Brady has done in the last 15 years, the US government has been literally behind. It says it right here in black and white. And so in his video, which again, he has since taken down, so I'm not going to assume I know why, but maybe he's not so enthusiastic about a debate now. He did it a while ago and I just noticed it. And he said I was being a coward, I didn't want to debate. But the moment I saw it, I said I put a comment at the bottom of the video immediately saying, yes, please. I really want to talk to him because I see a lot of parallels between me in the military component of US empire and him in the administrative component of US empire. I see a lot of parallels, and I see a lot of very constructive ways to compare and contrast the paths that our lives have taken by being a part of American empire. So, you know, he was saying stuff to me like, the CIA does meddle. And he mentioned the National Endowment for Democracy, but when he was talking about the US meddling, he only mentioned the CIA. So I wonder what he thinks about the NED. On his Facebook page, I'm blocked by him on Facebook. I tried to reach out to him, and I wasn't blocked today. And I saw him come online, and I said, hi, Shane, are you there? Let's do this interview. And he blocked me. But before that, I was taking a look at his Facebook posts, and one was about the NED, and he said they're supporting democracy around the world. I think we're all familiar with the NED, how it's not even close to a secret that they just took over CIA-backed regime change, which is exactly what Shane admitted to. He admitted that the CIA meddles around the world. I'm assuming he thinks that it's wrong. But then if the NED is just picking up where the CIA left off and they're just rebranding it, spinning it, and still doing it, then that's just as bad. It's just done with a mask, that's all. Now, he was talking about Myanmar in particular. He was very sensitive about this, and I get it. He went to Myanmar, he worked with these people, they're his friends. There's no way, even if you're just working for one day on a project with people, a bond develops. And it's very hard not to sympathize with them if they really think that they're fighting this battle and now there's this violence and people are dying. It would be very hard for him not to get emotional and upset about this. I totally get that. I'm not going to hold that against him. But what I want to point out is that this opposition in Myanmar is not a product of democracy. It's a product of foreign interference. He said, you know, the elections, there were 2 elections, and Myanmar's military got blown out of the water in both elections, which is true. And he said there was no evidence of vote rigging. But he assumes that vote rigging can only happen if someone tampered with the ballots. That's not true, especially when foreign interference is involved. If you have a foreign government pouring millions of dollars into the opposition, building up their capacity to campaign, training them how to campaign, giving them money to campaign and reach more people than other parties can, building up media networks for them to use to reach more people, they are completely tilting the game board in favor of this opposition that the US backs. They will win the election every single time, and they don't need to tamper with a single ballot to do it. Okay? That's still rigging the election. That is also foreign interference. Shane talked about Asian people having agency and a right to self-determination. The US is undermining both by interfering in their internal political affairs. That's why interfering in another nation's internal political affairs is a violation of the UN Charter. That's why it's illegal under international law. This is why when Russia or China are accused of it, everyone gasps and are shocked and are frightened and are angry. But the US does this openly. So if you go to the National Endowment for Democracy's official website, Miss Zin Mar Aung, she is the perfect example of what I'm talking about here in Myanmar. And I have old videos, and I will link to them in the video description below about the entire so-called national unity government that's trying to get back into power, throw the military out and get back into power. She is the NUG Minister of Foreign Affairs. She literally has her own page on the National Endowment for Democracy's website. And it says down here that she's got this Yangon School of Political Science, an NED-funded institution that educates young activists in the values of democracy. So this is how you rig an election, by creating institutions that just churn out people who are going to vote the way you want them to. That is not agency. That is not self-determination. That is foreign interference. And Ms. Zin Mar Ang is a vector of foreign interference. She is not an agent of democracy and self-determination in her country. It also says that she got the 2012 Women of Courage Award. This was awarded to her in Washington, D.C. by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and also then First Lady Michelle Obama. She's been to Washington on other occasions. This is a 2015 NED event, the make or break moment for democratization. This was in Washington, D.C., says so right here. I'm not imagining this. I'm not making this up. They're not lies. It's in black and white. All of this is in black and white. This is the on-scene and on-spectacular and the, quite frankly, boring part of modern-day empire. You have the military invasions, the proxy wars, the riots carried out by US-backed opposition, and then you have this. You have the administrative force that comes in and tries to overwrite a nation's indigenous institutions. And this is what Shane Brady was involved in for 15 years and maybe still involved in today. Something else Shane Brady said during his video, challenging me to debate, was that the idea that the CIA is interfering is not an epiphany to anybody. But it seems like to my audience it is, because a lot of people who suspected this never really could find the evidence. Now they can see the evidence. And it makes them feel a lot better. And that's why I do this. I'm trying to open people's eyes. A country is being targeted in two directions: the military force and the force of riots, color revolution, and proxy militants, and then the administrative force. And I'm trying to shine more light onto this so you could see it. If you could see it, you could shield yourself from it. That's what this is all about. I mean no ill will towards Shane Brady. If he's ever interested in an interview, I'd love to talk to him about all of this. I want to try to compare my experience in the military component of imperialism, with his experience and the administrative component of imperialism. I mean, surely, if we had to find some common ground, I think we could all say that, at least looking back at Western imperialism, you know, when the British colonized Myanmar and called it Burma, we could agree that that was wrong and that we shouldn't allow that to happen again. But then we have to look at Aung San Suu Kyi, who admittedly had advisors who were British citizens, Australian citizens, advising her on the most sensitive matters of sovereignty for a nation: their constitution, their economic and trade policy, their legal system. Could you imagine a US president surrounded by Russian and Chinese advisors who were just working in the Oval Office with them? It would be unthinkable, and yet this is what was going on in Myanmar, which again is why the military had to take over. Their country was being colonized all over again. One last thing I want to kind of touch on, because this really bothered me, and I don't like it when people say this. It's said in bad faith when they say this. Brian supports the Myanmar military. I'm not from Myanmar. I don't live in Myanmar. I don't support Myanmar's military. I said them taking over, that was necessary. Whether they took it over properly, whether they used the best strategy, whether they have the best crowd control practices in place or not, this is all open to debate. But they absolutely had to remove that government. You can't have a head of state who is being all but led by a leash, literally by foreigners, foreign citizens from their former colonial masters, all but leading Aung San Suu Kyi around on a leash to reorganize the entire country. For whose best interests? The people in Myanmar or people in London and in Washington and on Wall Street or in Brussels? Think about it. So I hope you learned something, or at least maybe you have a new way of looking at it. The military force and the administrative force, just like Thomas Barnett said, they work in tandem. They're part of modern day empire. If you understand that, everything else makes sense. The NED and the USAID, they all work together on this side. This side is what softens up a country to get the NED's client regime into power. The opposition works their way into many of the aspects that you need to get into to take over a country, and then USAID takes care of the rest. The USAID and organizations like Concern Worldwide, Save the Children, Relief International, Humanity and Inclusion, and TroCare, and the list goes on and on. Honestly, there's just an endless list of them. But if you do some digging, you'll see the USAID is using all of them as an intermediary to do this work inside a targeted country. That's the reason why they do it. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It helps the channel grow, and it's free to do. There's a notification bell. So when I upload a video, and I do it almost every day of the week, except on the weekends, but even then sometimes, you will get a notification and then you can watch it. Check the video description for all of the links that I discussed. There's a lot of them, and it's very interesting. Learn how to start looking into this. The more people that are doing this and exposing this, the faster this process will go, where we can wake people up to how modern day imperialism works. And if people understand it, they won't go along with it. If people woke me up to what the military was all about before I joined, I might not have joined. I had people try to, and maybe that was some of the seeds that were planted that finally helped me wake up in the end. There's also ways in the video description you can help support my work, because I don't have a USAID grant given to me every year to do my work. I depend on the generosity of my audience. They have been helping out a lot. And look, if you don't have any money, don't worry about it. If you're just sharing and liking, that is enough. Dropping kind comments or giving me news tips, that helps so much. You have no idea how much that helps. It helps a lot. And as always, thank you for watching.